Alrighty guys, exciting one today. Gen 8 Trek Madone, full bells and whistles. We got SRAM red on here and I'm so looking forward to this one. Obviously the paint job is incredible, but what's it like to actually ride the bike? What does it feel like? How comfortable is it? They're going to be the questions I'm answering today. I'm going to have a list of all the chapters on the side here so you can see which ones I've got coming up, and I'm going to do my best to try and describe what the bike feels like to ride in all of those categories. I am going to be running normal bottles because that's what I've got and I prefer the larger sizes of them, and I know it's not my bike, okay? I know. I will weigh it in later for you with pedals so you can see what the actual riding weight of this bike is, but of course I'll take the saddlebag off and the Garmin mounts there as well. Anyway, let's get into it. A lot of you that watch this channel will already know that I've ridden the Gen 7 Madone, and well, you'll know that I was pleasantly surprised with that bike. It was excellent. I will be doing a direct comparison video between the Gen 8 and the Gen 7 in the future, just because I feel like it will need a little bit more time. But this one is just specifically about the Gen 8 and how it rides. Let's talk about the comfort of the bike, because I think it's actually a very important thing. And on this bike, I've been very impressed. So a lot of the times I've actually been looking down at the rear wheel to see if it's coming down or going soft, but it's not. It's just absorbing all of the bumps really, really well. Another area where I think it's really improved on the previous generation, over the vibrations and the rough roads also smoothed it out just as well as this bike, but this bike doesn't buckaroo as much. So when you used to go over like a speed bump or something on the Gen 7, it used to buckaroo the rear end a little bit. The Factor Ostro also buckaroos a little bit over the bigger bumps, but this bike doesn't have that buckaroo effect, so surprisingly comfortable. Now that I'm at the end of the ride, I mean, my legs are pretty pooped, but the rest of me is actually feeling quite good. And it was the same with the previous generation. Surprisingly comfortable bike. You come off the bike feeling quite nice, like you haven't been beaten up at all. It just absorbs all of those vibrations for you from the road. It's easy to say that this bike might be more comfortable because I was in Mallorca, much better roads than here in the UK, but honestly, not every road in Mallorca is perfect. We did a lot of lanes on this day, and I think you can see from the B-roll that they are not perfect roads everywhere. Now I'm running at 70 psi on a 30mm tyre, 88 kilos at the moment. And yeah, it was very comfortable. Well, I'm excited to talk about the handling because I think it is excellent on this bike. Let me explain why. Essentially, this bike is so stable and so direct. In a lot of sense, it's very like the Factor Ostro van, the new version. You know, it just holds bolt upright when you're on it. Other bikes, like my tarmac over there, feel like it likes to move a little bit underneath the body when you're pedaling in the saddle. But no, this like bolt upright feels super stable. That's not to say that when the bike moves underneath you when you're pedaling normally is a negative thing. It's just a characteristic of the bike. But it makes the Gen 8 here feel very stable. But amazingly, on the other hand, the moment you want to turn, the moment you want to do anything, you can use your hips, you can use the bars, you can use your feet just to tilt this thing in to any corner that you want to, and it's so light and so nimble to do so. I've been very impressed with it. You just have so much control over this bike, and it doesn't suffer with the previous problem that the old Madone had, where you started to lean in and it kind of got heavier and heavier to push that lean. This one, it just stays light the whole way through the turn and the whole way through the lean. It doesn't feel like it restricts you at all. It works with you, this bike. It feels like you're so connected to the bike. Just the lightest input from when you turn, the bike just seems to respond to it so well. It's almost like the bike knows exactly what you want it to do. Some bikes, you start to turn in and it's like they're almost a little bit disconnected from you. You haven't quite hit the perfect line, but every time you turn in on this, the bike knows what line you want to hit, just because it's that intuitive on this thing. And for me, like, I think a great handling bike, people just get it instantly, straight away, and you will on this thing. So very easy to find and hold the line on this bike. But if you do all of a sudden see a pothole come up or something, once again, extremely easy to make mid-corner adjustments. You can just use your hips, you can just turn the bike a little bit more, and the bike will just swerve around it, get back onto the line that you want to, and it just holds it rock steady on the line that you want this bike to hold. One thing I find really nice on the handling of the Trek bikes is you almost have a sixth sense when you're drafting. I find with Specialized I have to focus a little bit more on holding a good draft, but on this bike I feel like I've got a sixth sense of where that front wheel is, and it just makes it easier to hold the wheel basically. Something small, but it's something I've noticed. It's really nice to ride this bike with no hands because it is so stable when you're riding it. So if you want to take on fuel, if you want to have some water, if you want to have a gel, if you want to take off a gilet, things like that, it's really easy to do it on this bike. So when you're racing, you've got to do things at high speed. It actually works really well on this bike. How does it handle the side winds? You can probably hear, this is Mallorca, it's an island, it's always windy, a little bit, and amazingly well. Like, you just don't feel the side winds at all on this bike. And obviously a lot of that comes down to the front wheel nowadays. And if you look at these Bontrages, I mean, they kind of look like they have quite a V shape on them, but they do handle the wind really, really well. I'm quite surprised, especially for an aero bike with deep tubes, that the previous generation did really well, and I think this is even more stable in the side winds. We've been doing some continuous gentle uphill until now, but finally got a smidge of gentle downhill, and it kind of feels like the bike just took me right up to 40-45 k's an hour, no problem. And it just sat there as if it was easy, and it felt really nice. And obviously most modern aero bikes do that. Whilst this bike is very fast along the flats, when I compare it to things like, say, like the Canyon Aeroad, maybe the old Madone really, every pedal stroke that you put in, you had the sensation of getting 105% of your power back through the wheel. It felt like you were getting extra power as you were going on the flats. This one, it feels like there's absolutely no losses whatsoever. So 100% of your power is going into the wheel and into forward momentum, but it's not quite that full propulsive feeling that you get with a full-on aero bike. On a lot of modern aero bikes, when you're up to speed, the bike is almost begging you to go faster and faster and faster. I think that's one thing this bike isn't doing. Whilst it will hold the speed comfortably and go those speeds, it doesn't beg for more speed. When you hold the aero position on this bike, it's really nice and comfortable. I feel like I could just spend a lot of time down there. And I think part of that is, well, it feels longer, so it's just less work on the triceps. But I suspect a lot of that is down to the SRAM red levers here, just being a little bit longer. But it feels like you've got the length to hold that position. Although one thing also being said, it's probably a bit more comfortable than normal because there's a lot of spaces in there. So take that as a caveat. Here we are at the top of San Salvador, and climbing wise, this bike is fantastic. I've got to say, I mean, they've made it look like the Madone, but this is a climbing bike. It's so easy just to hold a high cadence. The bike feels really light when it's underneath you, and it feels like a feather when you're out the saddle. You put the power down, it just goes up the hill, man. I've said it before, I've said it again, it feels propulsive when you're in the saddle, a lot more than it does on the flats. It actually feels like it's more energetic and it wants you to push harder on the uphills, less so on the flats. So I think what they've really done here is they've made an Amonda with the hole in the back, to be honest. But I've really enjoyed the climbing on this thing. So when you're riding on the flats and in the saddle, the bike is very upright and stable. But for some reason, when you're out the saddle, it feels like it wants to shift side to side and move, just be a little bit more dynamic underneath the body. Now, why is that? I don't know. I'm just describing what I'm feeling. The way that this bike sprints is, I think, is going to really suit the sprinters in the pro peloton. Once again, because of that handling, because it's so direct and because you're so in control, you can literally just hold a dead straight line and wham the power down on this thing. It's really nice in terms of that. One thing where I think it falls a little bit short is, I've used these words in the past to describe some other bikes like the Factor Ostro, the SLA. They're sharp, they're snappy, they're energetic. I wouldn't use that word with this bike when I'm sprinting. The word I would use to describe this a bit more is, it's like a muscle car. So it feels like it's got a lot of torque as you're powering through those pedals. It feels torquey. And to try and put that in something more descriptive for you guys, it's a little bit hard. But it feels like a muscle car. It feels like it belongs on a drag strip when you're sprinting on it, which is in some way surprising because it handles so well. As soon as you want to deviate from that line, it's so easy to do so and so controlled. But yeah, it feels like a muscle car when you're sprinting. let's chat about weight and the sensation of this bike. It feels like a light bike underneath your body. Definitely feels lighter than the previous Gen 7 Madone. Just feels like it moves underneath you a little bit more when you want it to, and it just feels a little bit more propulsive up the hills. Now, with that being said, I've just weighed it in, and it comes in at 7.7 kilos in a size large. Now, for their top-end SRAM Red model, for a climbing bike, that's also meant to be aero. You know, I'll give it some defense. It's got some bar end mirrors and this Garmin mount here, but realistically, that's probably what, like another 100 grams. So maybe let's call it 7.6. Still not amazing. But yeah, even though it is heavy, it feels good underneath the body. It feels like a light bike. All right, but discussing the attractiveness factor of this bike, I'm gonna say if you took the Gen 7 Madone out of the equation, this is still a looker of the bike. I've actually seen loads around here out in Mallorca at the moment, and even though they haven't got the extra special paint job like this one, my eyes are still drawn to them. I still find it a really, really attractive bike. And I don't care what anyone says. I think the whole back here, I think is really cool. Does it add in compliance and aerodynamics? I mean, only a wind tunnel test would actually let you know, but honestly, I still think this is a good looking bike. I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10 there. But it's only going to get a 9 out of 10 because the previous gen did look a little bit better. Currently editing at the moment and looking at the prices, and thankfully Trek have done a little bit better here. They've brought their prices more in line with other brands. So if we look at the SLR7, £8,000, about the range of the Specialized Tarmac SL8 for a similar Ultegra spec build, and you've also got the one-piece bar and stem in there. Going to their top end of the range, the SLR9, £12,000, once again, kind of in line with the top end bikes again. Not cheap still. One thing that is slightly crazy is their extra special paint jobs. I mean, the one that I'm riding here is 16,350 quid. That's insane. The differences are it's got SRAM Red rather than Dura-Ace, and the paint job itself, I mean, it's a very special looking paint job and it's meant to cost 1,600 quid. But how does that go up by like £4,350? Trek. So, better, more in line, still not cheap. This is classic Madone stuff right here. When you're at low speeds coming out of junctions and you want to turn tightly, I haven't even got big feet. I've got size 8 feet and it still hits it. I'm finding that with the angle of the handlebars here, when I rest my hands on when you're climbing, I find my wrist is tilted outwards too much. I've got too much external rotation in the arm, and I kind of feel like I want to be a bit more this way, internally rotated. It feels more comfortable. So it's just the angle of the bars and where it sits you. I can confirm bottles are easy enough to take in and out of these aero cages here. So if you want to just use these, put normal bottles in them, you can. I've been riding normal bottles all day, and when you have a normal bottle in there, this presses up against the base of this one, and you can see I've actually rubbed off a little bit of paint there underneath where it says Trek Bicycle. One thing to note on here is this isn't my riding saddle height. I ride about up there, but even with that saddle height there, it's a relatively, well, that's a medium-sized drop. But if you wanted to slam this thing, the drop is going to be absolutely huge on there. I mean, considering that this is going to be the minimum drop as it is from the saddle to the bar. So one thing to consider, if you like to slam your stem, you might not be slamming your stem on this bike. Alrighty, let's jump to some conclusions. So it's the end of the day. We've done about 137-ish kilometers. Went to San Salvador. If you know what the climb San Salvador, Mallorca, one of the best, easily in my top 5. But yeah, if I had to conclude this bike, it seems to handle everything you throw at it really, really well. I think it climbs fantastically. It's nice when you're out the saddle. It feels propulsive. The handling is actually amazing, and I think they've made the handling better, but it feels like there's something missing on this bike. It feels like it hasn't got that spark, that zing that the previous generation did on the flats. It feels like to me they have turned the Madone into a climbing bike with this one, which, You know, it's no bad thing. I mean, it's no slouch on the flats whatsoever. Rolls amazingly, but it feels like they've just taken away the spark. A couple of extra things to note here. First of all, do I think this bike is as aero as the previous generation? I think when you've got the aero bottles in there, the answer is probably yes, it's just as aero. Essentially, it's making a fairing in the middle of the bike, using those bottles to its advantage. If you just put normal bottles in there like I did, I reckon it's probably a little bit less aero than the previous generation. I mean, it says it's 300 grams lighter. Yeah, the weighing scales maybe don't say so. Well guys, there it is, the Trek Madone Gen 8, a bike that is fantastic, but just missing the edge. If I've missed anything out in this review, please do let me know in the comments below. I reply to pretty much everything if you have any further questions. Also, you can find me over here on Instagram. Apart from that, like I said, if you want to see a direct comparison between this bike and the Gen 7, I'm going to be filming that a little bit later, so subscribe for that. If you want to see a full walk around of all the tube shapes and all the changes, then I've got that linked below over here. I've been Jason, this has been Cycling Unboxed. See you in another video.